Avatar the Last Airbender is without question my favorite animated show of all time. So much so that I've made 3 videos about this particular topic. But with the new live action show coming out, I felt like there was definitely at least one more itch to scratch here. More specifically about the visuals, especially with so many people praising the Netflix adaptation for being very visually accurate to the original in terms of casting, costumes, locations, visual effects, all of which look fantastic. But I do have to say, if we're going for full accuracy, for a genuine live-action remake of the original, there are 1 or 2 things visually that the live-action show, just from the trailers alone, haven't quite understood 100%, and these are the things that still allow the original series to age so beautifully and make it still look far more stunning than almost any other animated property today, and I will be breaking down these qualities into 3 specific topics in this video. Firstly, let's talk about the aspect ratio. Most animated shows are presented in the traditional full-screen 16:9 aspect ratio, including Legend of Korra. The M. Night Shyamalan version, my least favorite film of all time, was shot on 2:35:1, basically a fancy way of saying it has 2 black bars at the top and bottom. The Netflix version also has a similar ratio, with the black bars also being at the top and bottom, unlike our original, which has the bars at the left and right. This 4:3 ratio allows for the original to stand out visually in many different ways. Being that 4:3 is taller than it is wide, this allows us to see a number of really unique shots that more effectively depict the height and size of certain cities, creatures, and characters. In fact, I would like you to listen to, real quick, this clip from a cinematographer named Seamus McGarvey, great cinematographer, about selecting aspect ratio and integrating that into the actual design of the movie.
Bad times at the El Royale. Again, we went anamorphic 1:2:3:9 ratio and thought much more carefully about the composition in the design. And Martin Wiss, the designer, built in 2:3:9 frames for us. Even all the lattice work had 2:3:9 holes in them that we could track through. And throughout the set, that aspect ratio fits into the set wherever you look. It was built with that in mind, even groupings of photographs. You just put the 75mm anamorphic on the Finder and be like, that is perfect. It fits so well. And the designer will be, yes, I know.
There you go. Avatar the Last Airbender also does that brilliantly in its architecture, sets. It's almost as if these buildings and some of these costumes were designed specifically to fit this particular frame, which is further evidence of the show's creative brilliance. This goes straight back to the classic rules of photography and cinematography. If something is tall, then use a taller ratio, and if something is wide, then use a wider ratio. If you've ever been to a taller city, then you'll realize you might have photographed that city more vertically, and in a wider city, perhaps, you'll shoot it horizontally. Same philosophy applies here, and whilst Avatar the Last Airbender features some of the most beautiful landscapes we've ever seen, so one might think a wider ratio would be more suitable. I, however, believe that 4:3 is a genius outside-of-the-box choice because, as mentioned, it allows for a more interesting use of scale and comparison of scale, as well as being the single most perfect aspect ratio for photographing the human face. Just look at some of these close-ups and tell me that it would look better with the top and bottom cropped out. Point number 2 is composition. We've talked about the size of the frame. Now let's talk about what actually fills up that frame and how that plays a key role in making the show look so visually incredible. Now, it goes without saying that an aspect ratio like 4:3 instantly makes symmetry more noticeable. Look no further than the works of Wes Anderson. But for this section, I would like to turn some attention to a legendary Japanese filmmaker named Yasujiro Ozu, who, way before people were raving about Greg Fraser on The Batman dirtying up the frame, was making masterpieces in the 50s and 60s. Just look at some of these frames he's able to conjure up. The texture of it all. And that is such a vital word I think so many filmmakers forget about when creating a shot. Texture. That's honestly part of why so many people are now complaining about movies looking kind of plain. The Batman does it brilliantly with regards to putting stuff in front of the camera with a lot of deliberateness, but Avatar the Last Airbender, like Ozu's work, isn't just about putting stuff in front of the camera to create texture, but specifically where the camera itself goes. I'll throw in another great visual master in here from Asian cinema, Wong Kar-wai. Look at his work, look at Ozu's work, and look at The Last Airbender. What do you see in common? Frames within frames, putting the camera in positions that show more shapes, circles, squares, rectangles, lines, instantly add that extra level of texture to the shot. Sometimes it isn't just about adding stuff, but finding it from what is there. Granted, this is an animated show, so the brilliance of it is that they actually created all of this from scratch, but did such a good job that we talk about all this stuff like they just went and found it somewhere, which is, again, brilliant. But texture and frames within frames aside, what really sets Avatar the Last Airbender apart is how it puts its characters within the frame. This sounds kind of dumb, but here the close-ups are close and the wide shots are wide. Look at the Shyamalan version. Shot like a more traditional movie with mediums and awkward shots like this, never truly going all the way in any shot. This is close. And this is wide. There are barely any shots in this version that show a person from head to toe, and whenever there is, there's always constant movement, which we'll get to in a second, but here, it has almost an illustrative quality, which again fits perfectly with the style of the show as well as the story. Avatar the Last Airbender, more so than its successor The Legend of Korra, follows a more episodic structure, so much so that it has these chapter marks at the beginning of each episode, almost like a book. So it only makes sense that the look of the show is almost like something one would find in a comic book or a children's book illustration, which is just stunning. And I honestly think that when it comes to what's in the frame and where it's all placed, they really are trying to make it as beautiful as possible. Even in moments of genuine darkness and intensity, there is a real grace and grandiosity to the way the visuals are shown. There has always been this debate in the cinematography community that perhaps good cinematography doesn't just mean pretty pictures. Sometimes it's what the story needs. Again, the good example is the Batman. It's not traditionally pretty, but it's interesting. Then the images here are super interesting, as I'm sure you would all agree. But you know what? I also think they set out to make something that is just quite simply stunning and didn't hold back, and we love them all the more for it. But ultimately, more than anything else, I think the reason behind the show's visual mastery, the secret sauce if you will, is point number 3, stillness. I'm going to show you 5 iconic shots from the show and let you figure out what they all have in common. No camera movement. The shots are allowed to be shots. People always talk about their favorite visual movies, be it Blade Runner or Skyfall or La La Land, whatever it might be. And we all use the same phrase. If we paused the film and took a screenshot, we can frame it as a photo. Well, you ain't gotta pause with Avatar the Last Airbender. No show gets this idea more than this one. Sure, the camera will move and sometimes move a lot, and it's fantastic. But for the most part, the visual language of the show is really rooted in stillness. Static shot after static shot after static shot, only moving the camera when it really needs to. Look at this conversation scene between multiple people in a more modern movie. Why is the camera moving here? Where is it going? Again here. Why is there so much camera movement? The audience are not that easily bored. Well, maybe some of them are, but whatever. Now, look at this similar conversation scene from the show. Still. Static shot cuts to static shot. No unnecessary movement. So when the camera does move, you feel the impact more. Would this shot be nearly as interesting or iconic if Deakins decided to pick up the camera and chase after me? No, it wouldn't. The greatest filmmakers know the importance of holding back, letting a great scene play out and just capturing it. And sometimes that means staying still. There is a reason that some of the greatest visual directors of all time don't use fancy camera moves, and for the most part allow the beauty that's right in front of them to speak for itself. What this philosophy also does is allow any and all movement in the frame to be way more noticeable. One of the great visual directors of all time is Akira Kurosawa, of course, who is a master of understanding when to move and when to hold, who would often infuse his shots with loads of movement within the frame. Fire, water, fog, wind. I wonder what show could really benefit from doing the same. The bending does the movement. It does more than enough talking. Do you really think that a shot like this would be nearly as iconic if it was done on handheld style with quick cuts? No, it wouldn't. And it's not just about the bending of the elements, but they infuse movement in subtle ways, in so many frames, from the wind blowing the clothes and the grass to the animals, the people, and dare I say even the sound design and music. When you have shots that are so still and allow you to really absorb it all, it ain't just what you see that elevates the visuals, but what you hear as well. Genius, genius, genius. So when you put some of these qualities together, you are left with a show that to this day still stands levels above most of its kind, and one that people still aspire to equal. So all we can do now is sit back and hope the upcoming show is able to do so on some level. Because what Avatar the Last Airbender, the original version, is able to do visually to this day is still legendary.